committee will come to order. Welcome and thank you for joining today's hearing entitled "To Review the National Forest System as Supporting Forest Health and Confronting the Wildfire Crisis." So after brief opening remarks, members will receive testimony from our witness today, and then the hearing will be open to questions from our panelists. So with that, good morning. Welcome to today's Forestry Subcommittee hearing titled, I already said that part. As the title reflects, today's hearing will examine how this committee and Congress can better support the health of our forests and ongoing efforts to address the wildfire crisis. Make no mistake, our forests and rural communities continue to face an unprecedented forest health and wildfire crisis. This is an emergency we must immediately tackle on multiple fronts. The Forest Service plays the important role of managing our forests for ecological health, ensuring a reliable supply of domestically produced timber, and supporting rural prosperity. For decades, and particularly in the West, we've continued to see a decline in forest health on tens of millions of acres and catastrophic wildfire on an unprecedented scale. Over the past 5 years alone, we've witnessed some of the most destructive fires on record. As these fires become larger and more intense, more communities are impacted every day. The statistics are clear. 2015, 2017, 2020, we saw more than 10 million acres burned per year. 6 of the 7 largest wildfires we've seen in California, my home state, have occurred in 2020 and 2021, including 2 large fires that burned approximately 1 million acres each, both in my congressional district. The August Complex Fire in 2020 burned more than 1 million acres, and the Dixie Fire of 2021 burned 960,000 acres. In 2018, we had the Camp Fire, which destroyed the town of Paradise, took the lives of 85 people. As a side note, the good people of my district provided me with this special gavel made with salvage wood from the Camp Fire. So I'm grateful to be able to wield this in their honor as we do the good work that this committee needs to do to make sure this sort of thing doesn't continue to keep happening. So this is truly an urgent crisis. We need to act now. We must dramatically increase active management and speed up the pace and scale, an often used term in this committee and these conversations about forestry. Pace and scale of forest restoration on tens of millions of acres of federal and non-federal land. This includes activities such as prescribed fires, cross-boundary field breaks, logging activities, yes, we'll say that word, logging, to thin overstocked stands, the use of fire retardant, and expedited salvage logging and burned area rehabilitation after a fire. Congress has provided the Forest Service with significant new funding to support the agency's 10-year wildfire plan. While funding is clearly needed to log and properly manage millions of acres at high risk of wildfire, I also believe that funding alone won't be enough to protect our forests and communities long term. The agency will continue to be challenged by the regulatory hurdles that it has long faced. This includes lengthy processes under NEPA. Frivolous litigation only delays critical management activities. It also includes the latest legal challenge from extreme activists to curb the use of fire retardant, which we've discussed, which is an essential tool for firefighters to use and to slow the spread of wildfire. Looking ahead to the next Farm Bill, the 2014-2018 reauthorizations provide the Forest Service with a variety of tools intended to help the agency better manage, incentivize more public-private partnerships, grow new markets for forest products, and help rural communities thrive. This includes expanding existing authorities such as Good Neighbor and stewardship contracting to leverage more partnerships that will increase landscape-scale restoration projects. It also includes expanded use of categorical exclusions, such as for insect and disease treatments, to help move along common-sense forest management activities with known beneficial outcomes. 2018 Farm Bill contained a research and development program to help encourage new markets and infrastructure for forest products and advance tall wood building construction in the United States. We must also encourage the construction of new sawmills and other forest product infrastructure to ensure the long-term viability of these partners. We need to have long-term commitments so they will build them. The last Farm Bill also expanded the landscape scale restoration program on cross-boundary restoration and authorized new tools for hazardous fuels on bordering non-federal lands. This committee must build on the good work that we've accomplished over the past 2 reauthorizations and again use this year's new Farm Bill to ramp up even more active forest management and restoration along the National Forest System. We should also encourage the Forest Service to use every tool in its toolbox, including new authorities provided in the Infrastructure Act, specifically increased use of the fuel break categorical exclusion and the bill's emergency authority. Summer is soon upon us. We've already seen fire starts, and the Forest Service continues to select additional sites for restoration projects. As this year's wildfire season ramps up and as we consider reforms of the upcoming Farm Bill reauthorization, today's hearing is indeed timely. So we're pleased to welcome Chief Randy Moore of the U.S. Forest Service. Chief, we look forward to your testimony and a robust conversation on the variety of issues. How did that word robust get in there? I hate that word. A productive conversation on the variety of issues facing the Forest Service in our rural and forested communities. So we also look forward to working with you on identifying ways that this committee can best support the urgent work that we need the Forest Service to accomplish to lessen the risk of catastrophic wildfire. With that, I recognize my colleague, Ranking Member Salinas, for her opening statement.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Opportunity to hear from Chief Moore about the state of our national forest system and to discuss what is and isn't working in the forestry provisions of the 2018 Farm Bill, the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, and the Inflation Reduction Act. Forest health is a critical concern for communities around my home state of Oregon and the nation. Public and private forests alike provide critical support to our rural economies, as Mr. Lamalfa just stated. Moreover, healthy forests help mitigate climate change and foster resilience against wildfires and other climate-induced natural disasters. One point that I continue to hear from forestry stakeholders back in my district is that the Farm Bill programs, and whether they're voluntary conservation incentives to tree disease research, they all play an important role in rural prosperity. So I look forward to hearing from our witness about program successes, as well as programs that need to be revamped in this year's Farm Bill to improve our forest health, our communities, and our climate. So thank you for being here, Chief Moore, and I look forward to your testimony.
Well, thank you, Ranking Member Salinas. Very economical on time there. So, I don't see our chair or ranking members, so I would request any other members of the committee that would submit their opening statements for the record so the witness may begin his testimony and ensure that there's ample time for questions during today's hearing. So, as I mentioned earlier, our witness today, we're grateful to have him here, is Mr. Randy Moore, Chief of the U.S. Forest Service at the U.S. Department of Agriculture. So, thank you for joining us today, sir, and we will be pleased to proceed to your testimony. You know the gig. We have 5 minutes, but we won't be too tough on that. So, so the timer will count down. You'll know the deal. So, Chief Moore, please begin when you're ready.
Great. Chairman Lamalfa, Ranking Member Salinas, and members of the subcommittee, thank you for the opportunity to testify before this committee. During my 40-plus years of federal service, I've worked in many locations across the country, from North Dakota to Colorado, Kansas, North Dakota, Missouri. And I've also led the Forest Service in the eastern region located in Wisconsin, as well as the Pacific Southwest region located in California. I've witnessed a tremendous change over the years, including many authorities that Congress has had through the Forestry Title Program and the Farm Bill over the past 20 years. Each new Farm Bill has equipped us with essential tools that have enabled us to tackle resource challenges, strengthen work with communities and partners, and equitably serve all people of America. This committee's work on the next Farm Bill is central to making forests and grasslands more resilient to our communities, making them safer in the face of increasing threats from catastrophic wildfires, drought, and epidemics on forest insects and disease. I want to be clear that reducing the threat of wildfire across landscapes is a top priority for our agency. Through the wildfire crisis strategy, we've ramped up to treat the right places at the right scale using an all-hands, all-lands approach. Recent investments by Congress gives us a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity to take bold and strategic action. We're working to do just that, to put every dollar to good use. This past January, we announced investments of $938 million in 21 high-risk landscapes in the West. This work benefits roughly 200 communities. It reduces risk to infrastructure, and it improves forests. Our wildfire crisis strategy is also guiding significant investments beyond the initial landscapes, such as community wildfire defense grants across 22 states using about $200 million from the bipartisan infrastructure law. We're grateful to Congress for providing the resources to seed our initial work. Sustained execution, however, will depend on continued federal investment coupled with funding and capacity from our partners. Tools in the Farm Bill play a pivotal role in reducing wildfire threats and promoting resilience. Families and individuals own most of America's forests, so we need management options that remove barriers and promote shared stewardship as well as cross-boundary work. The Farm Bill is uniquely suited to do that. Through the Landscape Scale Restoration Program, we work with states to assist private landowners in achieving conservation goals. It ensures private lands remain as forests. Through wood innovation grants, we're accelerating new markets for wood products and wood energy. Cross-laminated timber is one of these innovations, which is exemplified by the tallest building in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, which currently stands at 25 stories. The Farm Bill also supports collaborative forest landscape restoration projects. They expand science-based collaborative work and leverage partner dollars. This work has reduced the fire risk on more than 4.6 million acres. It will continue to help communities like those in Northern California, who have recently invested $3 million in the Western Klamath Mountains Forest and the Fire Resiliency Project. Thank you for the Good Neighbor Authority. We've reached 380 agreements across 38 states, and we've tripled the timber volume under GNA since 2018. This tool strengthens ties and works with states, tribes, and counties. We access expertise and capacity for treating larger landscapes. For example, we have 26 active GNA agreements with Oregon Department of Forestry that have resulted in completion of 20,000 acres of non-commercial fuel reduction, thinning work, as well as wildlife habitat improvements. We're working hard to leverage available authorities and funding. Obviously, there's much more to do, especially with so much at stake. Your work on the next Farm Bill underpins our efforts to improve forest conditions and reduce threats to vulnerable communities and infrastructure. We look forward to working with you, and I want to say thank you, and I welcome your questions.
Thank you, Chief Moore. Appreciate that. I see our full committee chairman, Mr. Thompson, has joined us here. Would you like to incorporate a statement or questions up front at this moment, sir?
Well, thank you, Chairman. I appreciate that. Thanks to the Chairman and the Ranking Member, and to the Chief. Chief, it's good to see you. Thank you for being here. Much appreciated. I appreciate today's hearing, the opportunity to discuss the issues before the Forest Service and as we work at preparing the Farm Bill's forestry title. For many forested and rural communities, our national forests are critically important for supporting jobs, providing a sustainable supply of timber, promoting forest health, quite frankly, backfilling where we no longer have property tax in support of our municipalities, our school districts, our counties, because of those public lands. Over the past few Farm Bills, this committee has provided the Forest Service with new tools and authorities intended to allow the agency to better manage. We did that specifically in 2014, 2018 Farm Bills. For example, we expanded the Good Neighbor and Stewardship Contracting Authorities and provided the Insect and Disease Treatment Authority, other categorical exemptions, more landscape approach. And we've also used the forestry title to encourage new markets through initiatives like the Wood Innovation Grant Program and providing incentives to build with wood. Along with restorative restoration work and fuels reduction projects that are underway and urgently needed, another priority should be to increase timber harvesting and get closer to our allowable sale quantity across the National Forest System, that sustainable growth rate. Doing so would have the dual benefit of supporting forest health and quite frankly, economic health in those surrounding communities. So as we move forward this Farm Bill cycle, I'm hopeful we can further build on the success of 2014, 2018 Farm Bill forestry titles. Chief, I'm look forward to hearing from you what additional tools that the members of the employees of the Forest Service need to be able to do their job. Chief, can you, how are we doing overall in terms of, on a national scope within the forest system of green stick harvesting towards that overall sustainable growth rate? And are there some forests that you can point to that would be best, that are, they're doing well, that we may be able to look at their best practices of why they're able to get closer to where we need them to be for both forest health and, quite frankly, economic health within those communities?
Yeah, Congressman, thank you, first of all, to be able to explain the whole timber program. And I have 2 minutes. It may take 15, but I'll try to abbreviate it in 2 minutes. But in general, we have a number of forests across the U.S. that are really maximizing their opportunities to use the tools to provide a timber supply. Keep in mind, though, it's about more than just providing commercial timber. It's also about creating health and resiliency in our landscape, which requires us to look at removing some of those hazardous fuels that are not commercial grade timber. One of the things that we're really trying to push to complement the existing infrastructure is wood innovations, and we've invested in quite a bit of money looking at wood innovations to utilize the type of material that we have out there that is serving as ladder fuels for these fires. It's cross-laminated timber and the innovations behind it. It's about biochar. It's about biofuels. It's about nanocellulosic material. It's the type of material that you can put into concrete to strengthen the concrete. And I think the more that we diversify the current infrastructure, the better able we'll be to remove that material off of our forests and create economic opportunities.
So if I may, because we're running out of time here, and we can, if you wouldn't mind following up in writing in terms of the whole question about how well we're doing towards that sustainable growth rate as an overall system, and identify. But my follow-up question would be, I know that you all are doing great things. I'm a huge, follow closely our Forest Service lab professionals. They do a great job. The question I have, though, it seems like we've been in a talking pattern about that, and that's only going to work when we can get it to commercialization. When we get that, all the great things you talked about, and probably more that we can talk about in the future, we get that to commercialization, then we actually have a vehicle to improve forest health, and then, quite frankly, but we need to be concurrently work on economic health of those communities. That was the promise that our predecessors made when we took that land out of the private sector to form the national forest. So, Chief, thank you for being here today. Mr. Chairman, I apologize. My time has expired.
No apologies needed, Mr. Chairman. So I'd like to now recognize our ranking member, Salinas, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Chief Moore, as you noted, climate change is exacerbating the wildfire crisis that the nation is facing. Wildfire seasons are expected to become longer and fires to become more frequent, more extensive, and more severe. In Oregon, wildfire risks are growing. We saw that with the Bootleg fire last year, and even the wetter and more populous region west of the Cascades, which includes my district, it's likely to see a significant increase in wildfire activity. So to better prepare for and respond to the wildfire crisis, we need to expand our forestry workforce. Chief Moore, can you talk a bit about the role of the civilian conservation centers in training foresters and firefighters, and outline what more can be done to support job training and help get more young people into the hiring pipeline?
So thank you, Congresswoman. The Civilian Conservation Corps is a great tool to bring young citizens into this firefighting community. And we also have other opportunities with our Job Corps centers, training them to become wildland firefighters, as well as serving in other roles within the agency. We just recently looked at hiring 100 additional forestry trainee-type professionals. We have programs in place where we provide college tuition in some cases for some of our young people to have a chance to go to college and pursue a career in natural resource management. So we have a number of programs that are available that we are beginning to pursue, and now more so than what we have in the past, because over the last 20 years, we have been losing resource professionals in the organization based on the conditions on the ground with fires, but also just the whole budget situation. So with the bipartisan infrastructure legislation as well as IRA, we have been building capacity within the agency, and we are looking at a lot of different avenues to bring in young people into the organization, particularly for resource management.
In your testimony, you highlighted several agency programs that have a proven track record of furthering reforestation efforts, reducing wildfire risk, and improving forest health. And this includes, as you mentioned, the Collaborative Forest Landscape Reduction Program, which has funded several projects in my home state of Oregon. Can you talk a bit about how these Forest Service programs also support the economic stability of our rural communities?
Yeah, you know, the collaborative projects has been a real boon to a lot of our small rural communities. And if I look at what we currently have on deck, we have about 30 large-scale projects across 15 states. And when I look at what they've been able to do, they've been able to significantly decrease the potential for fire across the landscapes. These projects are also available to states, tribes, as well as local communities. And in terms of investments and the different approaches we're taking to landscape scale restoration, we've selected 31 landscapes across 15 states, and 17 of those landscapes are in 11 states, and they are currently receiving funding in our FY23 bill. In short, there's a lot of great value in leveraging with our partners. In fact, when we look at the amount that's invested in our collaborative projects, for every dollar that the Forest Service invests in those collaborative projects, it returns about $1.81. So it is proven to be a really great value in terms of leveraging federal dollars with the local communities.
Pivot to next-gen forestry technologies and innovation.
Yeah.
Chief Moore, can you provide us an overview of the new tools and technologies used to support reforestation activities? And is there more that can be done using drones, geospatial, and remote sensing technology to support the work of the Forest Service?
Yes, Congresswoman, there's always more to be done. We are jumping into the technological phase fairly rapidly. We've trained well over 100 certified pilots for drones. We're looking at the application of drones for prescribed burning, for natural resource management. We're looking at the use of satellite data combined with our FIA data, the forest inventory analysis data, to do ground truthing of what we think we see from the air. So we are moving into the technological age. One other example I would share with you is, I believe it's in California, where instead of using our lookout towers, we have put a set of cameras across the landscape to spot smoke or fires as they happen. So we are pursuing technology in a much bigger way. We know that we have much more to do and much more to learn, but that's an area that we see a huge advantage for us in the future.
Thank you. I yield back.
Thank you, Ms. Salinas. I recognize Mr. Kelly from Mississippi for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Chief Moore, how can we work together to prioritize and advance the use of wood like mass timber at scale in the marketplace? What more do we need to do to use mass timber in rural communities to build affordable housing, schools, hospitals, and other critical infrastructure?
Yeah, Congressman, I think what we have to do is further refine the research around cross-laminated timber. Even though cross-laminated timber has a great future ahead of us, we have not refined the research to the degree that we need to be using small diameter, low-value material. Right now, we are using it in a bigger way, but we're using commercial-grade timber to look at cross-laminated timber. The key, I think, to cross-laminated timber in this country is to be able to refine the research in a way that it can use low-value, small-diameter material, because that's what we have in abundance. And so that's our focus. We're working with the university systems. We're working with corporate scientists as well as the federal scientists to look at continuing to work in that arena. It's very promising, though. Right now, we have about 1,600 buildings that are built with cross-laminated timber. We have another 12 new facilities coming online. And so while it's showing a lot of promise, we want to kick that whole research down to use different type of materials, because I think you'll see a huge boom once we're able to refine the research in that way.
And I've been on this committee for 8 years, and on this subcommittee, I think all of those, or at least most of those. One of the things that concerns me most is our inability to manage the tinder in our forests, especially out west. So we don't do controlled burns, we don't have the manpower, and a lot of times that is for climate protection is the reason we don't do controlled burns. And then we get these massive wildfires that create much more pollution and climate problems than had we done the controlled burns. What are we doing to make sure that we're doing the controlled burns and that we're managing our forest, especially out west, properly?
So, Congressman, after last year's fire in Hermit's Peak, I called a 90-day pause in our prescribed burning. And that was to give us an opportunity to really look at how we're using that program. And we also brought a lot of our technical specialists from down south, Mississippi including, to look at how the South is maintaining the ecosystem that they've established to prescribe burning, or controlled burning. And so what we are doing is taking lessons learned in the South and seeing how they might apply in the West. And now what we are looking to do is bring all of that together. I'm going to be releasing a report here fairly soon looking at some changes in our prescribed fire, particularly out west. You know, we can't talk about our success in prescribed burning because when one fire gets away, you've seen the damage that it can do. Because I could sit here and tell you that prescribed burning goes the way it should go 99.84% of the time. But that 16% when it gets away, we have lots of examples of the damage that it can do. And it's because of the condition of our landscapes. And that's why the conversation needs to be around vegetation removal in a much bigger way, but also looking at the innovation that's needed to utilize the type of vegetation that we have on our landscapes, because it's burning down communities, it's creating carbon in our environment, and it just, nothing's good about it.
And finally, my last question is, we gave you $10 billion from the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act and Inflation Reduction Act, and we're having a problem both recruiting and retaining employees. How can we best manage this money, or what can we do in Congress to make sure that we have the great Forestry Service employees who are both there and who are experienced and who are capable of carrying out? What authorities do you need from Congress to help you with this?
Well, I think we have to first identify the type of employees we're talking about. If we're talking about firefighters, I think we've got a lot going on now on how we can recruit that. The challenge that I'm having as Chief of the Forest Service is this. We have things in place on a temporary basis for firefighters, but what it doesn't recognize, and this applies mostly in the South and the East, is that we have what we call reserve firefighters who fight fires. In fact, we have...
And if I can, I only got 17 seconds. I would just say that everything you do to the left of a fire pays off 10 times in dividends to what we do on the right side in firefighting. And I only have 8 seconds, Mr. Chief, but thank you, and I yield back, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Now, we will now recognize the lady from Washington, Ms. Glusenkamp Perez, please.
Thank you, Mr. LaMalfa, and thank you, Chief Moore, for being here this morning. I'd like to start by highlighting the challenges resource-heavy counties face as they work to support their communities with limited income streams. Skamania County, in the southeast quarter of my district, is 80% National Forest Service land, which represents a significant part of Gifford-Pinchot National Forest. Counties like mine often feel like we have to come to the federal government with our hand out to make ends meet. And I want to talk about ways to work towards economic independence. Secure Rural Schools has been a critical program, but it does not provide consistent income levels. One idea I've heard addressing this is community forests. Productive land from the Gifford-Pinchot would be managed by the county with supervision and continued ownership by the Forest Service. However, the income benefits would flow to the county with a small percentage going to the Forest Service as a management fee. So, Chief Moore, I'd love to hear your thoughts on this proposal and any comments you have about how counties can partner with the Forest Service to find more sustainable income levels.
Congresswoman, I think that is the challenge that you've laid out here, is that how do we continue to collaborate to find ways forward? If I look at GNA as an example, the Good Neighbor Authority, right now we're making a lot of great progress with states. We're not making the same level of progress with counties and tribes. Part of the reason, I believe, is because the counties and the tribes can't retain the receipts the same as states. So I think if that is one of the changes that take place, I think you'll see a much greater use of GNA authorities across our country. In terms of kind of where do we go from here, I think the collaboratives have identified a number of things for us. And one of the things that is identified for us is that together, that we're better than we are separate, and that we need to continue to work toward this goal of doing landscape treatments out on our forests, and basically not just the forests, but just the landscapes in general of all jurisdiction and ownerships.
Thank you, Chief Moore. One thing I hear a lot about, and building on the questions from my colleague, Representative Kelly, are the challenges faced by the Forest Service employees in finding housing. Yeah. So the Cowlitz Valley Ranger District located in the Gifford, my staff has heard stories about seasonal employees who are living out of their cars due to the lack of affordable housing. I know the Forest Service supplies some housing, but it tends to be insufficient. The area surrounding the GP is rural and also lacks a sufficient affordable housing stock. All this means that many ranger districts are unable to attract or retain staff. In addition, there are already many who already live in these understaffed ranger districts who are willing but unable to gain unemployment with the Forest Service due to the challenges navigating USA Jobs application process. Getting a resume through electronic filters and into the hands of a real person is a very difficult process. And we've all heard about folks who know how to game the algorithm to advance their resume through these electronic systems. So constituents often ask if local hiring preferences, much like existing hiring preferences for veterans, could help reduce Forest Service staff turnover, help build community trust, and reduce staffing shortages. So my first question is, what can the Forest Service do with regard to housing to reduce turnover? And my second question is, what can the Forest Service do to simplify the application process for residents of the Ranger District seeking employment with the agency?
So let me start by saying anytime we have an employee sleeping in their car, it's an embarrassment. So I'll start there. I think the housing issue is much bigger than the Forest Service. I think this is a problem in our communities. If there are no available housing, there is nothing for our firefighters to stay in. Where there is available housing, are they affordable? And so that's the other issue. It's not just availability, but it's affordability. These are community problems, not just Forest Service. And I think that we need to bring all of our communities together to figure out solutions, because we're there for a service, and that's to protect the communities. But the communities also has to work with us trying to find those doable solutions. So that's where we are in terms of housing. We also have the issue of mental health. Our firefighters are working now instead of fire seasons, it's fire years. And as such, they're always gone from home because they serve this country. They go all across. Wherever there's a fire, they're there. So very little time for their families. And after a while, it wears.
And excuse me, in our last few seconds here, I'd love to extend an offer to have you come out and visit Skamania County or my district. Come out for one of our timber carnivals. It'll be a good time, I guarantee it.
I'd love to. Thank you for the invitation.
Mr. Chair, I yield back.
Okay. Thank you. Boy, great points on SRS and the ability to keep that going. It's a battle every year, and as well as and on the housing side, when you see an LA Times article where they're debating whether, like a town like Greenville in my district, for example, should that be rebuilt? by the way, do we keep building these towns back up? These used to be where the people lived that got the resources that we all use, whether it's a mining town, a timber town, or an ag town for that matter. So I guess the question is, do we want to have these products and do we want to have people take care of them? Thank you. Now I'll recognize Mr. Moore from Alabama.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate your robust leadership on this committee, and I want to thank Chief Moore for being here today as well. Chief, in Alabama, the vast majority of our forests are privately owned, working lands actually, and so I think in my second district alone, 4.4 million acres of private forest land, and we support 21,000 jobs and 7.9 million a year in payroll. So trees are a big business in our district, but according to the Extension Service in Alabama, more trees are taken due to disease and pests than are actually harvested for profit. So, Chief, can you expand on efforts of the Forest Service to collaborate, with private forest owners to manage pests and disease, please, sir?
Yeah, if I look specifically in your district with the brown spot needle blight, that is a problem down there. We have a lot of data on that blight, and we are working with the university system as well as our scientists trying to find solutions to that. But we do have extensive data, and that's a good place to start. And we are working with state partners down there to find solutions that's doable. So that's where we are with the blight. In terms of disease and insects, we've had, throughout the years, we've had problems with disease and insects. And we're beginning to see that we need to treat this the same as we do wildfires, at that landscape level. Because disease and insect don't respect jurisdictional boundaries like we do. And in order to do that, we need to partner with our state partners, our local leaders and these local communities, as well as the tribes, looking at solutions on how we address these issues. Depending on where you are across the country, there's different things that contribute to the conditions that we're in. And so if I was to look at Mississippi itself, that's different than, say, looking at Michigan, the emerald ash borer being a problem there. And it's different than looking out west on some of the pine beetle issues there. I think every part of the country has similar problems, but the bottom line is that this is a problem for all of us. Our scientists are working diligently with the research, and our state and private partners are working diligently with state and local partners in trying to address that in a way that's acceptable.
Chief, I'm going to change gears on you, but as fire season looms on the horizons, the Forest Service is being sued by extreme environmentalists over this fire retardant. It's a critical tool for fire suppression and for control. Do you agree that fire retardant is a critical tool? And what must we do to keep it in the arsenal to protect lives and property? And how are you working with the EPA to work through this issue with them this year?
So, Congressman, fire retardant is a critical safety tool, not only for our firefighters, but for these communities that are experiencing these wildfires. So what we're currently trying to do is work with EPA on acquiring a clean water permit, so that depending on which way this conversation goes, that we're going to be trying to cover our bases. The other thing that is maybe not widely recognized is that we have a number of states that also will be requiring permits under the Clean Water Act. And so we may be required to get permits from the states as well as from EPA.
How far along are we in the process, Chief? I mean, I know sometimes these permits from the EPA can drag out. You feel like you're making success? You're making any kind of headway with them?
Yeah, I believe that we are making success with EPA. I suspect, though, it'll probably take another 2 to 3 years to get that done. And that doesn't include what we might be required to do with certain states or different states.
So what do you do in the meantime if you're waiting to get?
Well, we're going to continue to use retardant until we order not to.
Until you get a ruling?
If we order not to. I don't know if it'll come to that, but we're going to use it until we're told not to.
And I think you should. What are the options if you can't use it? What do you do, Chief?
Well, we don't have an option other than water.
All right. Thank you. I appreciate your time. And with that, Mr. Chairman, I'll yield back.
Thank you, Mr. Moore, for that robust line of questioning. Remember the size of the gavel we got here, hopefully, you know. The Islander from Maine, Ms. Pingray, is up next. 5 minutes.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. And we do have trees on islands in Maine. We have trees everywhere in Maine. We're the most forested state in the nation, so we care deeply about this topic. And I appreciate having this hearing today. Thank you very much, Chief, for being with us. I get the chance to see you both here and in the Appropriations Committee, so I was happy to hear about the work that you're doing. And I've been really pleased to hear some of my colleagues talk about the markets for wood and some of the innovative wood products that I know the Forest Service is very engaged in supporting. In our state, we are now just about to open a new facility that will create wood fiber insulation products for the home, and that's a conversion of an old paper mill. Like so many places, we've lost some of our traditional wood industries, particularly paper, and to see the conversion of these mills into other things like wood fiber insulation, biochar, some of the products that you've already talked about, is very exciting for our state to see that happening. So I just want to follow up a little bit more on that. You talked about more research needs to be done. Is that a financial issue? Is that language? What else can we be helping you do to do that? Is most of that taking place at universities or some of it at the Forest Service Wood Lab? And I guess the other question I have is, I feel like sometimes we also have to have an outreach and education campaign that architects and builders need to see the opportunities, things like cross-laminate timber that can be stronger than steel, and just some of those opportunities. Also, I think most people don't understand. They're so concerned about cutting a tree that they forget if you cut a tree and you use it as a part of a construction project, that carbon stays in that tree and you have actually sequestered that carbon on a permanent basis. So that's an important principle, I think, that architects and other builders need to understand. So I've talked a lot, but do you have some thoughts you'd like to share?
So, Congresswoman, you've answered that better than I could. But as you know, Maine has been a leader in not only using some of this innovative technology, but also being a part of creating it. So I want to compliment you and the state of Maine for how you have really jumped into the arena of innovations around wood. I think when we look at the wood innovations and community wood facility grants, right now we've funded about 99 projects and we spent about $32 million, which doubles our previous year's work. We are going to continue to move in this direction because we feel that, you know, as we look at the infrastructure in this country, we need what we currently have, and we also need it to be stable. We also need to diversify the infrastructure we have in this country now by using some of the new technology and the innovations that we're discovering through funding and working with states and universities as well as tribal and other federal partners. So I think it's a growth business. I think when you look at biofuels, even biomass, there's still a use for that. Because if you're not able to use it, then you're left with the results of wildfires on the landscape. And so it is in all of our best interest to figure out ways to utilize this material that we can create jobs out of, particularly in our small rural communities. Mm-hmm. And so I would just add that to the statement that you've made, because I think you asked a question, but you also answered it in many ways in terms of innovation and where we're trying to go with it.
Well, and I really appreciate the work you're doing on low-value, small diameter wood, because that's often the challenge that we're dealing with, and so many of these products lends themselves to that. One quick other question I wanted to ask you about. In the IRA, there's about $450 million to support small and underserved private landowners with climate mitigation, forest resilience practices through their participation in, it says, emerging private markets, and I think that means voluntary carbon markets. So much of our forest has been able to take advantage of offsets and the ability to make another source of income. That's already a market out there, but a lot of small landowners can't. Can you talk a little bit about how the Forest Service is working on that?
So in terms of carbon offsets, so the Forest Service's work is not about offsets in carbon. It's about total reduction in carbon sequestration. Now, working with partners allows us to work in different ways, but in terms of the Forest Service, and I would venture to say federal government in general, we're looking at total carbon reduction. And that's different than the private market where it's looking at carbon offsets. So I want to say that. And the second thing, and here we've partnered with Maine as well on several of these projects, but we've got University of Vermont even $4 million in FY23, and this is based on congressional directive funding in these areas. One of the places that you didn't mention that I'd like to bring up is the National Agroforestry Center. Mm-hmm. And you made a statement earlier about education, and that's an opportunity to demonstrate really a strong direct link between the latest research and giving that to the people who can put it to work. And we're discovering a lot of ways in terms of how we help farmers out. I think there's discoveries yet to be made on how that center is working. But there's a lot of interest, and agroforestry has really increased over the past few years, and the demand for training right now has outpaced our capacity to provide it.
Great, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair, for letting me go over my time, and I yield back.
You're welcome. I'll now recognize the gentleman with lakefront property on Lake Tulare.
That's the other Portuguese.
Mr. Duarte, yeah, from California, 5 minutes.
A little bit north of Lake Tulare, but thank you. Thank you, Secretary, for being here today. Chief, for being here today. Very much appreciate. We talked about a lot of good common sense business principles, communities where people can't get homes, new product innovation. I'd like to add to our dialogue here a little bit about the time frames that for good, solid forestry management, sustainable forestry management that will get us over time from the overgrown, highly dense forests subject to wildfire, inhospitable to many endangered species, and just inhospitable and threatened as habitat in general. When you work with a forester to create a sustainable forestry plan, let's say in the Sierra Nevada of California is a good example, it's what we're more familiar with, what kind of time frames does that forestry plan have to cover?
Are we talking about a land management plan?
Yeah.
Yeah. So
if we look at the successful privately owned forests like Sierra Pacific Industries, they tend to have a lot less forest fires, a lot better habitat quality, a lot better outcomes objectively than some of our public lands do that have been managed differently. Let's talk about best case scenario.
So there's two different questions. I'll start with the first one. In terms of how long it takes to do, we do forest plans, the state do the forest plan action. So in terms of the Forest Service, we've abbreviated the time it takes to do a plan. So it's 3 years now, whereas it used to be 7, 8 years to do a plan revision. So the Sierra Nevadas, and whether you look at the Sierra or the Sequoia National Forest there, we had completed that plan within the 3-year time frame.
I'm sorry, I'm not discussing the amount of time it takes to get the plan through. I'm talking about, is that a 20-year plan, a 50-year plan? Is it
It's about a 15-year plan, sir.
15-year plan? And that's the horizon that private companies would work on with a forestry management plan, that they'd log, they'd make some money, they'd sell products, they'd fulfill whatever regulatory obligations they have?
Yeah, well, the plans are much broader than that. That is only one component within the forest plans.
Okay. So do the regulations, the endangered species requirements, do they stay static over that period of time? Or
No.
is a investment likely to be made and the rules change?
No, the ESA, the Endangered Species Act, that stays the same until Congress decides to change it. But there's no changes in that from plan to plan if the change is not made at a congressional level.
So the Congress may not change the Endangered Species Act, but a new lawsuit may surface. The Cottonwood ruling obviously has major implications for what happens with that forestry management plan within that 15-year time frame. If someone discovers another creature or another creature gets classified as threatened or endangered, that could threaten the investment, threaten the plan, and have it go back to the 3 to 7 year process we're discussing?
Yeah, well, if you take the Cottonwood as an example, what could potentially be at risk is about 87 forest plans. And so you would have to, they would potentially be at risk of litigation. And so it depends on, you know, the litigation, the type of litigation, and what it will require us to do in terms of revising the plans or amending the plans.
So if anyone wants to capitalize on new product innovation, build new facilities, purchase forest land to rehabilitate it and get it back to a healthy, sustainable forest environment, we're talking tens of millions of acres, right, just in the Sierra Nevada. We're talking about a lot of land that any government program is not going to be able to accomplish the rehabilitation of. It's going to take private investors making a nickel here and there off innovative products, finding the employees, getting these communities back on their feet instead of letting them just burn and kind of go away. But these long-term investments are challenged because the rules could change at any minute, any time during that operation.
So, so a lot has happened over the last 20 years, and the Forest Service's budget has steadily declined over the last 20 years, up into the bipartisan infrastructure legislation and IRA, the Inflation Reduction Act monies. And so what we've been doing over the last 20 years is trying to add capacity by creating partnerships with different entities, whether there was tribes, states, counties, to do a lot of this work, other federal agencies, other state agencies.
But I'm sorry, but a lot of this work used to get done by logging companies and grazing families that ran cattle, that managed fuels through money-making activities that provided tax base and jobs and private sector activity. That has been displaced greatly, somewhat by federal programs that get some money, and maybe more money or less money, but never enough money to tackle the size of the job. And instead what we have is an uninvestable situation where the forests are overgrown, the rules are constantly changing, the communities are being lost in terms of housing, employment, anybody even wanting to live there, and the business models, for all the new products we may come up with, the business models for investment just aren't there.
We need to bring it home, Mr. Duarte. We can do a second round of questions since we're whistling through this committee so efficiently here today.
Thank you,
So,
Chairman.
Okay, so save that thought, okay? Mr. Vasquez, want to be recognized for 5 minutes. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Ranking Member, and thank you, Chief Moore, for being here today. Today, we are experiencing another historic fire in near Las Vegas, New Mexico, the Las Tuces fire. I represent the 2nd District, home to the beautiful Lincoln, Gila, Cibola, and Coronado National Forests, 4 of 6 of New Mexico's national forests. And as we enter wildfire season once again, it's imperative that my constituents and our national forests are protected. Chief, you alluded to this earlier, but the Calf Canyon and Hermit's Peak fire, one of the largest in state history, in fact, combined with the Black Fire in my district and the Gila, over 700,000 acres, are the 2 largest fires in our state's history. And tragically, the Calf Canyon Hermit's Peak fire, as you know, was caused by the U.S. Forest Service through a prescribed burn. Now, this has caused a lot of distrust in the federal government, particularly in our Hispanic land-grant communities in the north, and our ability to trust the federal government to manage fire and forest in our state. We have to change that. Now, Chief, I sent you a letter on March 1st asking for a response, along with Representative Teresa Ledger Fernandez, who represents the 3rd District in New Mexico, asking specifically what changes to your prescribed burn program were going to take place after displacing more than 400 New Mexicans from their homes and causing one of the largest wildfires in New Mexico's history. I've yet to hear from your agency, have yet to have a response on that. Now, you mentioned earlier that 1/16% of a chance that a prescribed fire goes in a way that you'd not like it to go. For us, that 1/16% means the loss of homes, of tradition, of culture, of grazing allotments, and so much more. So I would argue that there is no room for error in your prescribed burn program. Chief Moore, I would like to have, perhaps submitted for the record, but also here in this committee, an answer to that question. How has the Forest Service changed its prescribed burn program since that Hermit's Peak and Calf Canyon fire?
So I'll give you a response, and I'll follow up with you on some very specifics on what we're planning to do with that. But in general, we're looking at making sure that before any fire starts, that it has the latest technology. It also having real-time decision-making ability. You know, in the past, when you look at burn plans, for an example, it could be based on information that was made a week ago. Now we're requiring them to make the decision on the day of the burn so that you have the latest information. Also looking at things like portable weather stations rather than looking at large weather stations that covers a large area. And also using local knowledge. What we recognize is that people that are local in those communities understand the winds. They understand how fire behaves when it hits the landscape. And so now we are incorporating local knowledge into the decisions that we make, which we had not to the degree that we needed to in the past.
Thank you, Chief. And I agree that local knowledge is incredibly important. In fact, the constituents in my state I've spoken to have all said the Forest Service had to be crazy to have a prescribed burn on that particular day. And that is very disappointing because, as I mentioned before, more than 400 New Mexicans lost everything, including their homes. Now, we are facing the next phase of this tragedy, which is the compensation from FEMA. An investigation from ProPublica and Source New Mexico found that of the 140 households eligible for FEMA housing, only 13 had been awarded. That's after 400 days of this fire. Chief, do you agree that this is an unacceptable result following a catastrophic fire caused by the federal government?
Congressman, I'm not familiar with the data that you have just talked about, but I'm always interested in working with you. That seems like that's a FEMA question that you're asked, but
Well, Chief, let me stop you there, and I'm glad that you said that because this is where the disconnect comes from, and this is where I believe the distrust from constituents in New Mexico comes from. There's a disconnect here between federal agencies. If one federal agency causes a catastrophic fire that causes 400 people to lose their home and says now it's FEMA's problem, then people, rightfully so, are not going to have a trust in government. So how can the Forest Service work more closely with FEMA, which to this day has not awarded a single dollar, 400 days after this fire, to ensure that a problem caused by the federal government is fixed by the federal government? I understand it's not your jurisdiction, but how would you respond to those concerns?
Well, I respond by saying I understand the frustration in how different agencies within the federal government operate. I would also ask you to be understanding of I don't know what FEMA's rules are since I don't work for them, and that's not a put-off. I simply don't know what FEMA's rules are. But I will follow up and provide you with a response. And in terms of your letter that you sent in March, I'll look that up to make sure we are responsive to you.
Thank you, Chief. I appreciate that. And my constituents are looking for answers. And if I go to another subcommittee and ask FEMA the same thing, they're going to say, well, it was the Forest Service fault. So as you can understand, there's some real frustration here, and I expect to hear a response from you soon. Thank you, Chief.
Thank you.
Thank you, Chairman. I yield back.
Thank you, Mr. Vasquez. And our hearts go out to you and your constituents down there in that tragic situation that, you know, there's this really strong tension between the great need for more prescribed burn, yet the ability to trust it happening in your backyard and the right conditions. Local knowledge, we need to follow up on that more too, because that's something that would have been extremely helpful in fighting fires that I've had in my neighborhood as well. So look forward to work with you on that,
Thank you,
sir.
Chairman.
I'll now recognize Ms. Dreamer.
It's
Oh, I'm
okay.
going to screw it up.
It's kind of a long name. It's okay.
I know better.
Well, thank
Chavez
you.
Dreamers. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I was really appreciating my colleague, Mr. Duarte's line of questioning, so if I do have time, I wouldn't mind yielding back to some further questions that way, but you offered a round two. So these are going to be specific, Chief Moore, to Oregon. In your testimony, you discussed your staff's work with Cow Creek Band of Umpqua Tribe of Indians on a Tribal Forest Protection Act proposal and self-determination agreement. This agreement's goal is to reduce hazardous fuels on National Forest System lands that border tribal lands and private property. I do appreciate this vital partnership to reduce wildfire risk, but it's clear we really do need to do more. I'd like to hear from you on what challenges the Forest Service still faces in successfully treating both federal and non-federal lands over the next 10 years, and follow up to that, how exactly is Congress can help you address these barriers?
So thank you for the question, Congresswoman. I think we are beginning to make a lot of progress working across boundaries. As a matter of fact, no matter what state you go in, whether it's Oregon or whether it's any other state, what you'll find is that we have all agreed on one thing, and that is working across boundaries if we're going to make a difference. And that goes back to the all lands, all hands approach to try and address some of these significant issues that we have on the landscape. So whether you're talking about tornado damage, hurricane, disease and insects, a fire, we will not be successful if we don't work together and across jurisdictional boundaries.
So a follow-up to that then, what impact can we expect to see from projects using the Tribal Forest Protection Act and the Good Neighbor Agreements is one. And then will it have an impact on timber volume sold over the long term?
Yeah, I believe so. And I'll use a couple of examples. If I look at the Good Neighbor authorities that we have in Wisconsin, now we are looking at about 25 to 35 million board feet of timber working with them, so that's an increase. When I look at working with the tribes, we are also working in ways that they are providing a sustainable flow of wood as well through the GNA. Now, the tribes are not using that as much as the states, primarily because they can't keep the receipts the same as the states. Same is with counties. The counties and the tribes are in the same boats, and I believe that's something in consideration now in the new Farm Bill is to include the tribes and the counties and treat them the same as we do states in terms of keeping the receipts to use them.
I'll just do a quick follow-up, well, actually changing direction a little bit on climate resilience. In the agency's current advance notice of proposed rulemaking on climate resilience, it states that currently the Forest Service commercially harvests 0.1% of acres within the National Forest System each year, while noting an increase in disturbances driven primarily by overstock forests that are susceptible to insects, disease, and wildfire, which you've touched on. Can you explain to me how the Forest Service harvests so little from the National Forest System lands, yet you mentioned overstock forests as the primary driver of disturbance? And a follow-up to that is, do you consider harvesting timber to be a climate-smart forestry practice?
So last question first, okay? Yes, I think forestry and the science behind forestry would say that in the way it's used, it's certainly climate smart. In terms of your previous question, you know, for context, we have 193 million acres of National Forest System lands in this country. A lot of that land is not set aside for timber harvesting, so you're not going to be harvesting those lands. For instance, wilderness areas are set aside. We have grasslands set aside. If you look at some of the hazardous fuel reduction work that we're doing now, it's not commercial timber opportunities there. The reason I say that is because we have to broaden the discussion significantly. We have to talk about wood innovations. We have to diversify the infrastructure in the industry so that it utilizes the material that we have, which will sustain and even create more jobs, particularly in our small rural communities. The traditional infrastructure that we have is looking at commercial timber, and we'll always need that. But we have so much other material out there, small diameter, low value material, that I think we have the opportunity with innovations to create additional jobs to diversify the whole infrastructure that we have in this country. So I want to do that. You got steep slopes that you cannot harvest off of. I mentioned grasslands, wilderness areas. We have certain areas that is not allowed on that. So when you take away all of that land, that percentage that we are harvesting is going to be higher. But now I'll be the first to tell you that we're not taking nearly enough vegetation off the landscapes, and it's creating a hazardous condition out there for us. And we need to be able to do much more than that. I can give you an example. You didn't ask for it. Chairman, do we have time? So let me take the last couple of decades, and if I use 2020 as kind of a benchmark, we sold about 1.9 billion board feet of timber at the time. And by 2011, that 1.9 billion had jumped to 2.5 billion board feet that we sold. In the last 5 years, on average, we've sold about 3 billion board feet. Now, with the bipartisan infrastructure legislation, we're looking to increase that up to about 4 billion board feet, and that's on a sustainable level. that we're planning to do. And a lot of that takes into consideration new innovations that we have in wood that's going to help us get there. It also includes monies being spent under the bipartisan infrastructure legislation to upgrade existing wood facilities like wood mills, logging mills, retrofit them, and try to stabilize that infrastructure that we have. And so we are planning to do all of these things over time to increase the amount of vegetation we take off the landscape, because we know that it's critical that we do, but also create new jobs, particularly for our small rural communities.
Thank you, Chief Moore. Thank you, Chairman, for my time's expired.
Thank you, Ms. Chavez de Reamer. I'll recognize myself for 5 minutes. Chief Moore, how many board feet are growing on our 193 million acres of Forest Service land per year?
I don't have that answer. I can get that to you, Congressman.
You don't know how many new board feet grow per year on the?
Well, I don't know how the question is being asked, for
Well,
example.
you said you've increased to harvest to about 4 billion board feet per year. I just wonder at what pace or scale, so to speak, are we keeping up with new growth?
Well, I want to make sure that we have the right context, Congressman, because if you can't just look categorically across 193 acres and say that you have this much growth when that much growth is not really available to even be considered for harvesting.
Well, that's where I'll go with my next question there. So would you say that the number of board feet growing is exceeding the amount of harvest?
Yes.
By many-fold, or what do you think?
Yes, yeah, we're clearly not removing the amount of timber out there that we could be or should be, and most of it is budget-driven, sir.
Most of it is what?
Most of that is budget-driven.
Budget-driven. We're not giving enough money here in Congress.
Well, not to the degree that we need to be managing our forests. I think that Bill and Ira has given us a significant boost and increase in that opportunity, and now we just, if it's a one-time fix, then it's going to be good on a temporary basis.
How much is the service spending on innovating wood products to be used by private industry for making new products, new things? And you mentioned concrete and other areas.
Well, we've got about 1.8 billion between the two bills to look at opportunities like that. And
Okay, so is it appropriate that the Forest Service is devising new ways to use wood, or should that come from the private sector, that they would be out creating markets, so to speak?
Yeah, we are working with the private sector in other entities, including universities, to.
No, but I guess my question is that really your role, innovating new products, or is that something that's going to come from the big thinkers you have, all across the country that are constantly creating new products? So I'll leave that question aside here. So if we have money for that, how much did you spend on at least 2 occasions of shooting cattle in New Mexico?
I can provide
eradicating cattle.
I can provide you with the budget that we set aside for that.
You can provide that. Now, how is that a mission of the Forest Service, killing wild cattle in I think the Gila River area?
Well, I think if you look at our rationale for removing the cattle, they were wild cattle, and it becoming a safety issue for our publics that were visiting there.
People visiting those rugged areas where the cattle are, that
Well,
cowboys, I've been
Congressman-
told cowboys can't root them out of there doing cowboy work, but people are in there?
Congressman, cattle move around.
Yes, they do.
And they were moving around where we had publics visiting. And
So hiring
and safety
helicopters
hazard.
and hired hunters to shoot cattle in New Mexico was a priority for the Forest Service over new uses of wood or over prescribed burns and all these other things.
Well, Congressman, we have a variety of issues and concerns that we have on our national forests, and we can't afford just to focus on 1 or 2 concerns. We have to address all of the concerns as they come in to the best of our ability.
Sure. That sort of seemed, especially when you're asked by members of Congress to stop after the first time.
We've also been asked by members of Congress to continue.
Shooting cattle, okay. Let's shift back over to the fire retardant. Mr. Moore from Alabama was talking about that. So what I hear is that the backup plan, if the tool is taken away by a court via lawsuit, that is water. The backup plan is using water to drop from aircraft instead of the retardant and its properties of sticking to foliage or wherever is targeted. Is that what you said?
Well, I said we don't have any alternatives other than water if we cannot use retardant.
Okay, so tell us on the committee, how effective will that be, since my information on that is that water dropped from these distances, especially in a hot situation and a hot fire, tends to evaporate before it even hits the target. How effective is that going to be?
Well, it wouldn't be effective at all, and I'm not suggesting that we use water, but that would be the only alternative that we would have to make an attempt to.
So this underlines what a grave situation we have if retardant is taken away, right?
Yes.
Okay,
yes.
so why did the Forest Service choose to oppose my legislation to ensure that retardant is kept while this 2 to 3 year period of EPA looking at it, a 30-year-long used product? Why did they oppose my legislation?
I don't know that we propose it, Congressman, as much as we would like to work with you on pieces of that legislation to address.
Well, they took an oppose on it in our previous hearing.
Yeah, but we also, there's the intent of that bill we understand, and we'd be interested in working with you on making the bill more supportable.
So with 2 years to possibly get the permit, as you said yourself, in the interim, there's no alternative other than no retardant and maybe use water.
Yes, I did say that, yes.
Okay, all right. I've burned through this 5 minutes, so I'll come back and recognize our ranking member, Ms. Salinas.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Chief Moore, in the Inflation Reduction Act, Congress provided $5 billion to support forest management, planning, and restoration activities for federal as well as non-federal forests. Can you provide us with some information on this investment, and how has this additional funding been put to good use, and what successes have we seen?
So on the $5 billion, what we had to do was build the structure for success. Initially, we set aside 10 landscapes that we want to focus on. And these landscapes consist of about 250,000 acres apiece. Since then, this year, we've added an additional 11 landscapes, which we now have 21 landscapes. And of the 21 landscapes, that consist of about 28 million acres within those landscapes. And when we looked at the landscapes themselves, they're about 250,000 acres apiece. And so what the wildfire crisis strategy is doing is addressing 131 of those landscapes through funding of different types, whether that's Inflation Reduction Act funding or bipartisan infrastructure legislation funding. And so that's our plan going forward with trying to address the problems we have, and particularly out west.
Thank you. So development of new forest products enables us to build in a climate-friendly manner and can help support rural economies. Can you speak to how the Wood Innovation Grant Program is working, since it's been statutorily authorized in the 2018 Farm Bill?
Yeah.
And funding was increased in the Inflation Reduction Act. What promising products have received grants, and where do you see the future of forest products research and innovation?
Yeah, I think we're having a lot of huge success right now with wood innovations. And I mentioned earlier the cross-laminated timber, CLT. We now have 16 buildings that are being built with this, and we're looking for that to triple at the end of the year. Working with woodwork companies and WeWork is helping us to strategize and plan for different ways to look at wood innovations for use. When I look at biochar as an opportunity for mineland reclamation or farming, looking at it as a potential opportunity for carbon credits. I look at biofuel as another opportunity, using even biomass as an opportunity for energy, wood energy to be created. I think nanocellulose materials, what I mentioned earlier, is a product used to strengthen material. I think that we are looking at a lot of different opportunities on how to use wood differently, so we would have a much better chance of removing much more of the vegetation out of our forest that's contributing to wildfire, but also disease and insects, and just the whole changes in the climates that we're experiencing.
And then just to follow up on Congresswoman Pingree's questioning a little bit, What are we doing specifically to encourage commercial usage of some of these new wood innovation products?
Yeah, so we're working with, we've got a forest product laboratory located in Madison, Wisconsin. And they are working directly with corporations and others on utilizing both the material that the lab is helping produce, but also in how the lab is working with other university scientists in creating some of these innovations out of wood.
Thank you. So as you're well aware, the climate change is having a real impact on forests and forested communities across our nation. Can you speak to how state and private forestry programs like the Forest Health Protection Program help landowners ensure that their forests will remain productive and provide resource benefits, both environmental and economic, into the future?
Yeah, the Agri Center is one of the examples that we have that can work directly with private landowners, whether it's farmers or wood growers in the country. And it's a great opportunity to put in one location both education as well as the technical components of an agroforestry center. But it, more importantly, it gives the end user, whether that's a farmer or a root grower, the ability to implement some of the technologies that are coming through the agroforest center. And so far, it's working really well. I think that's an area where there's going to be a tremendous amount of additional growth there. And I think the things that we're discovering are things that are going to lead us further into this, uncertain future that we have around wood.
Thank you, and I yield back, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. I'll recognize Mr. Duarte now for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chief. Thank you, Chairman, and hello, Chief. Try and keep you straight here. We were having a good discussion. We actually had it in another committee, Natural Resources, a few days ago. So you're on a bit of a circuit here. But if we're talking about, once we start talking about government budget appropriations to sustain millions and millions of acres of forests that are overgrown, that we don't want to burn uncontrollably, that have some significant habitat, recreation value, and sequester a lot of carbon, which many are concerned with. There's nothing better than a private sector solution. There's nothing better than somebody making a buck grazing it, logging it, innovative wood products, and the more we move that to the private sector, the better. Please tell me, you can have your choice. You can either tell me what the prerequisites are, as you see it, the major prerequisites for successful commercial logging operations to help reestablish these overgrown forest landscapes into sustainable, profitable, productive forest systems, or where are the best models in the U.S. that you've seen, and what can we learn from them?
So I think the collaboratives are one way that we're seeing a lot of creativity in how we get work done. I think the Good Neighbor Authority, working with the states, the tribes, and as well as the local community, I think all of that is playing out now in terms of how we are treating the landscapes out in our national forests and those lands adjacent to national forests. So I think it's being discovered now. The collaborative forest landscape restoration projects are one of those. We have a number of those that are still being funded. And as I mentioned earlier, for every dollar invested in those areas, we get about $1.81 in additional work. And so those are examples of where we're having a lot of successes in trying to work across jurisdictional boundaries. And those are places where we're having a lot of success.
How many years till we're all caught up?
Well, I don't know how many years before we're all caught up, if we'll ever catch up. I think that we do have a lot of work ahead of us, and I think it's the job of all of us to try to figure out ways forward on that. And we're trying to do that through Wood Innovations when you look at what we have in terms of a federal agency.
But Wood Innovations, great. We've all seen new products. They're great, particle board, laminates, whatever. But we're importing wood now, right? we've got overgrown forests. Some of them old growth forests have been classified and managed with more of a hands-off approach than probably what's healthy, that have a lot of commercial, conventional timber sitting out there that are getting more overgrown when we could get back to economic private sector logging that doesn't exhaust federal resources and probably contributes back to the states, hopefully the tribes and counties as you're presenting. How do we get back to that so that we can actually get across the landscape, restore our forests, and reestablish thriving rural communities and the economic system that kind of hopefully takes care of itself in most cases?
Yeah, Congressman, I really think it's a matter of resources, and I'll tell you why. I had mentioned going back to the year 2000 and what we've been able to gradually and steadily increase over time. During that same amount of time, we've lost about 40% of our non-fire workforce. And so while we've lost a number of employees that do that very kind of work, productivity has continued to steadily go up. We've done that by a number of things. One is looking at processes, streamlining those processes. One is partnering in a much bigger way to maximize and leverage what we're able to do. And I think if we continue to go in that direction, we'll continue to see an increase in what we're able to do.
But the employees you've lost have been Forest Department employees, correct? U.S. Forest.
It's been a range of people. It's been a non-fire workforce.
Sure. But what we've lost more so is loggers, timber mills, right? The actual workforce that clears the forest and makes $1 doing it. And although you've lost staffing, the more critical factor is we're simply not sustaining our forests. We're simply failing to maintain our forests in any semblance. We're going backwards in the last couple decades rather than forwards in terms of forest management. Is that true?
Well, I think if you look at one specific piece of it, it's true. Another piece, it's not. I mentioned just now how the amount that we're providing, selling has gone up over the last couple of decades or so, not gone down.
But you're taking more wood out now than you were a decade or two ago, but the forests are progressively getting unhealthier and still becoming more overgrown over time. So we're not, we can, and the chairman asked you a few moments ago, do we need to double, triple, quadruple, 10x? What order of magnitude do we need to accelerate our board feet of lumber being taken out of our national forest environments to recuperate and then break even? And I mean, if you're getting $40 billion now or whatever your authorizations are now, what are you going to need to do that with a government program versus how do we get successful commercial forestry active again?
Well, Congressman, keep in mind that the end game is not to try and take as much timber off as we can, because we got Endangered Species Act concerns, we have Clean Water Act concerns, we have certain species that we're trying to protect, we have certain steep slopes that we can't operate on. And so the point that I want to make is that we're in a balancing act between...
But you're not balancing, I'm sorry. Endangered Species Act in California with the spotted owl has let our forests become overgrown, fire hazards, dumping carbon into the environment, destroying species for destroying habitat for other species. Please tell me, and start with this here in Nevada, where has there been a Mass Landscapes Endangered Species Act success?
Mr. Duarte, we're going to have to allow him to finish on this question.
Sure.
Okay. Or briefly finish that question, or we'll go round three.
So, what I'm saying is that we have laws in place, and we have to follow those laws. And when someone challenges the work that we're trying to do based on what they see is damaging to a threatened and endangered species, the law allows us to try and be responsive to that, and sometimes we don't agree, so we end up in court and having the court settle some of those debates. I think that's where we've been a lot of times, and so we can't just go out and maximize timber removal on these landscapes, because we've seen what that will do in our past.
Well, to be clear, I'm not talking about maximizing timber removal. I'm talking about getting the forest into an optimal, sustainable tree density so that it is ideal habitat as well as a productive forest, a excellent watershed, and not a threat to local communities through excessive fire hazards.
You'll have to talk about that in the next round of questions.
All right, I'll leave it alone. Thank you.
I'll recognize myself in keeping with the timeline here for 5 minutes. Chief Moore, following up on what Mr. Duarte was speaking about is that, when you say there's ESA concerns and clean water concerns, the wildfires we're doing are direct contributors, more so than any logging project I've ever seen. We can go back to the bad old days 150 years ago with clear cutting of hundreds of thousands of acres and things like that, but that hasn't been around for at least since the 50s or something. So the contribution of wildfire is so much more detrimental to water quality that washes all this ash and soil down into our brooks and streams and rivers and lakes and across the highways. Highway 70 closed half the time up in my area. The species themselves being burned out. I've been out in the woods where they go out and they have to hoot at owls to see if they're there or not before they can proceed with the project. Hey, maybe that's all good, but we're going backwards so fast, as you affirmed a few minutes ago. We're growing more board feet per day by far than what we're harvesting. It is what Mr. Duarte, he's not saying it either. We want to go out and cut every tree. It's a situation where we're not nearly keeping up. And so the priorities don't seem to be the emergency focus, and that's what I just don't hear from you over the years, sir. Respectfully, you're a friend and we've talked a lot, but I don't hear the fire in the gut over doing this thing, okay? And my people are sick of it in the district and all over the western states. So when we say, it's ESA's concerns and clean water concerns, these policies are contributing more so to ruining those than anything we could ever do out in the woods in this present day and age. So when we talk about set-aside acres, let me drill down on that a little bit. Wilderness areas and grasslands. Now, when new wilderness areas and grasslands are proposed, is your agency out there chiming in, advocating for them?
Congressman, I think this whole discussion is about the laws that we follow that Congress is passing.
No, but your agency has time to come speak against my bill on just simply keeping fire retardant around for the next 2 or 3 years while it's studied to death, okay? And so wilderness and grasslands, you just said a bit ago, those set-asides mean you cannot do treatment in there. So is there something magical about these areas that the trees don't grow, they don't overgrow and become fire prone, even though if there might be a steep hillside or there's a species there or a threat, something might get in the waterway? Are these areas are these set-asides, do they have some kind of way of self-sustaining that they're not fire prone?
Congress has approved the wilderness areas, and in that Wilderness Act, it also says that we cannot harvest timber in there. So these are laws that Congress is passing that we're implementing.
Well, the president names them, we don't approve them.
Yeah, but we have no choice to follow the law or even an executive order.
No, but do you have the fire in the belly, you and your department, to advocate, do not do these if you want to have the ability for people to go out and manage and keep roads open and not have to study to death building a culvert, replacing a culvert with a 2-year NEPA process to do basic things. I need to hear, besides that you have time to shoot cattle and advocate against my bill and things like that, that you're out there with the fire in the belly to say, look, we're falling farther and farther behind every year, every minute. And people at home, they just can't understand what's going on. And so we need prescribed burns, but in a way that respects what Mr. Vasquez was talking about from New Mexico. We need to be aggressive on that and push back on. Let me ask you about the categorical exclusions here now. We've had these in place since the Farm Bill 2018, 2021. Do you have an idea of how many new fire breaks or fuel breaks have been created? What kind of acreage using these fuel break and emergency authorities to expedite projects so we have basic fuel breaks around communities?
Yeah, so the linear fuel break CEs, so far we've approved 8 We have about another 20-something that are in the pipeline to be approved as well.
How many acres are authorized under each of
I
these?
think so far it's about 20,000 acres, but I don't know how many is tied into the other ones that's in the pipeline yet.
20,000, and so in round numbers, you are governed 200 million acres? 193 million?
193 million.
Yeah, okay. The Dixie Fire burned 1 million acres and devoured two of my towns, really, and parts of others. So 20,000 acres over several years. How do you think we're ever going to catch up on that? I mean, we give you the tools, and we want you to spend time using these tools to the greatest extent possible, but instead, cross-laminated timber is something I've seen in existence. Just about every church I've been into, they're made out of laminated timber in the sanctuary. So what is new in the area of laminated timber that we need the Forest Service to innovate new products instead of being out on the ground doing this basic work and not encouraging the private sector, as Mr. Duarte was talking about? So I have information here that says we have six uses of the authority in that categorical exclusion. You say we're now up to 8, and we have 20 in the works. So that would probably be a total of 40,000 acres by the time all is said and done, right?
I don't know yet.
Yeah, okay. Sir, and I'm really trying, I respect you and the position you're in and how hard it is with, you're fighting environmental lawsuits all the time, and you say you need more resources, but when we're talking about the inability, it seems, to increase pace and scale, one thing we need most desperately, it just starts to fall on more and more deaf ears around here. You know what I'm saying? It hurts us in our districts. It hurts us to keep feeling this frustration that the government is not going to get the job done for us. Mr. Duarte was talking about we need much more private sector work. We need your commitment from your department that if we build a mill for $200 million, that they're going to have a 30-year supply, that the cottonwood case is not going to come in and say, oh, we got to revisit a species here that they decided to show up or decided to be recategorized. We need a commitment to that, because there's no way in the world that we could ever fund you enough at the pace and scale with which the department moves to get anything done in a way that's going to be meaningful. So I'll pause there. Does my ranking member have a further question?
I do. Thank you, Mr. Chair. So as we've talked about, climate change is having a real impact on water supply of agricultural communities across the nation, and certainly in the Pacific Northwest, in my region. Healthier watersheds provide more water for downstream users. Chief Moore, can you provide insight into the watershed condition framework implementation?
Yeah, so there's a lot of different ways of looking at that, Congresswoman, and right now we're focused on fire sheds to look at getting at the fire issue, and of course they can sit within a watershed. One of our biggest challenges has been, to report on outputs on an acre. For instance, we go into a watershed and we treat so many acres of that watershed to move it from one condition class to the next condition class. And I don't know if it's time for us to consider outcome-based reporting rather than output-based reporting. Looking at the outcome-based reporting would allow us to take a number of different actions within a watershed or even within a fire shed to improve the condition of that fire shed or watershed.
Thank you. And then can you provide an example of a priority watershed where desired outcomes have been achieved?
Yeah, I think if you look at a municipal watershed as an example, and we have been putting some of our G&A authority and work in those municipal watersheds because they serve the communities in the area there. So that would be a priority watershed as an example.
Thank you. So as you know, economic pressure such as that from suburban development put forest land owners under pressure to sell their land. Can you speak to how effective the Forest Legacy Program is in helping landowners to preserve ownership through the use of easements?
Yeah, I think that's been one of the real successful program areas. And, we've seen on occasion where, depending on the location across the country, the original owner of the land is getting to the point that they can't farm or ranch. And they look at turning it over to their offspring, their kids. The kids are not interested in that work. And so now it's not a working farm or a working ranch, but you still have to pay taxes on it. And so what we're finding is to keep land open, we're looking at the legacy program is one of those, I think, great successes over the years will allow the owner to have some income, but also to keep the land, in exchange for keeping the land open.
And to follow up, is the program effective in reducing fragmentation of forest lands?
Yes, I think it's one of our successes.
Great. And are there any adjustments that should be made to make these programs easier for users?
So I'd like to think about that because I've heard some discussion from some of the staffs, Congresswoman, and get back with you on that.
Thank you. No further questions. I yield back.
Thank you. Chief Moore, when we're talking about the situation with old growth and protection of that, we had a very positive, productive discussion in Natural Resources the other day on what Speaker McCarthy brought forward with the protection of the giant sequoias in California. But also the acknowledgement that lack of management near them has endangered them, and indeed we lost some areas of that in the past and yet another fire wave through the area. So we have to do better if just on that. But that said, as the agency contemplates more work on old growth and mature forest, as we're calling them, is the agency now going to have to split between direct fire suppression of maybe around communities, WUIs, or is it going to shift more resources to protect old growth?
Well, what I'm finding is that there's been an explosion of homes being built into the wildland-urban interface, so that question is becoming fuzzier. Protecting the giant sequoias as an example, there's a lot of work there, and those are iconic trees that thousands years old. And so looking at some of the emergency authorities we have to protect those trees, I think has been really great for us, as a country, not just an agency. And I'll give you an example. The work that we've done out there to date, we have about 7,000 piles of material out there. We have burned probably 2,000, a little over 2,000 piles of material out there. And we're on schedule to burn the other 5,000 or so piles. The reason I talk so much about wood innovations, because if we had wood innovations refined, rather than burning 7,000 piles of slash from creating health and resilience in our forests, we could create products and jobs out of that material.
Well, sir, we're importing lumber, so I don't know if we have a lack of market for wood products in the country, and we have plenty of regulations to prevent the harvest and plenty of regulations to make it difficult to truck them and have trucks that are available, or even home building, I suppose. So let's shift over a little more on UC Berkeley in California. They actually have a productive division in their forest department that they have research that shows that Southern California has lost half of its mature forests to fire, insect, and disease in just the last 10 years. So the authors at UC Berkeley concluded that there's a hands-off approach which is increasingly failing to preserve mature forests, and that, in quotes again, management actions should be taken despite uncertainties if the cost of inaction is high. Uncertainties probably meaning the usual litany of lawsuits, what's it going to do to a species here and there, what have you. So when we're talking about wilderness areas and grasslands and monuments that have a hands-off, stay-out approach, wouldn't the Berkeley work suggest that instead of this off-limit approach, that they should be aggressively managed or at least just catch up, whether we're talking the giant sequoias or any other highly valued old growth or mature lands?
Congressman, I think we all agree that the National Forest needs more management conducted on them. That's not debatable. That's something that we all agree on. What we're trying to decide is how do we utilize the type of material that we have out there in removing that vegetation.
Alexandra said you have 5 minutes for it. I'm sorry, I missed the last part.
Yeah, no problem. I said we all agree that we need to do more work out there. I said the discussion has really been over how do you utilize the type of material that we're removing off the landscape.
I think there's a market for it, but you know, if we're talking a few dollars for that versus a lot more dollars to do the other parts, so, well, I'm going to conclude my line of questioning as I have another committee beckoning as well. But Ranking Member, do you have any closing thoughts before we close out?
Just quickly, Mr. Chairman, thank you. I want to thank Chief Moore for providing us your valuable insight into the work, the challenges, obviously the tensions and opportunities across our forestry programs, and your thoughts on really how to improve some of these programs. The information and insight that you've shared with us today will enable us to develop policies that will help improve programs to deliver results for forest health, rural economies, and help us fight climate change. And I do think it is a balance and a tension that we're facing right now. But, you know, we have to address these associated fire risks, disease, and insect infestation. I think you've given us a lot to think about. So thank you for your time today.
Thank you. Thank you, Ranking Member, and the rest of our committee members that could join us and be part for a portion or a good part of the hearing today. It's much appreciated. Extremely important topic, obviously. And Chief Moore, I appreciate, again, you spending time with us over here on the Hill and working with us. But I just have to say that we need more fire in the belly, sir. We need more passion about this because we can't keep doing the bureaucratic shuffle on this and think we're going to have our western lands somehow look anything like they are intended to or used to. And I'm just disappointed. So, sir, let's keep finding ways and aggressively move at the pace and scale that's going to prevent my district and others like it from continuing to lose more towns, lose more habitat, and have our lakes filled with ash and mud and such. So with that, we will conclude today's hearing. Thank you all.